It's been a while since I've taken a more in-depth look in our main backyard garden at our home where Sasha and Zelda and I live on our little half acre. I've talked a fair bit about this in the past. I'll link to videos throughout showing this space at different times over the years. Just recently got a whole bunch of sawdust to redo the walkways. Been doing a lot of weeding and planting lately. It's feeling like the space is looking in a nice way. I'd like to walk around and look at it in detail, so I hope you stick around. The area that I want to walk through is this area. And here I would guess it's about 1/10 of an acre, probably a little bit less. Overall 1/16 of an acre backyard garden. We started this in the spring of 2013 and have evolved it over the years. It's a pretty solid food forest at this point, like mainly canopied in a lot of areas, but still nice little open glades of pockets here there for annual crop production as well as nursery work. First, so I'd like to take a look in our cattle panel high tunnel. All these years later, boy, is it 8 years old now, it's still functional. Just did a bunch of watering in there earlier today. You can hear the dripping. I've talked about these before. These little float valves have been incredibly useful to us. These are hooked up to different rainwater collection systems, and I used a pump and a battery to lift water from here and water. And now it's refilling at a nice, gentle, slow pace. What got watered in here, I feel really nice about what's happening in this space this year. We have all sorts of different varieties of basil that are on either side of different cultivar hot peppers. I think I mentioned these in the video where I was talking about the pump. So they're growing pretty nicely now. We're going to pick a few of these peppers off so they can focus on getting more leaf growing. They're coming up from the bottom there. But we've got fish peppers and habaneros and jalapenos in here, I think. A bunch of different basils. And then on the north side, some really pungent aromatics. Well, we've got our miyoga ginger, which is turned into a straight up weed. This is actually what it looks like when we try to dig most of it out in the spring in order. All of our spring sales and shipping of miyoga come from this high tunnel in the spirit of trying to get rid of it, not because we don't like it, but because we need it for other things. And the tiniest of root fragments come back. It's pretty phenomenal. But we leave it wherever we can because it's a beautiful and fantastic plant. And then wherever there's space, we went through and put in some Tulsi transplants. So we've got a nice medicinal basil in there, as well as sweet marjoram, which is an incredibly aromatic. Imagine you have fresh orange juice mixed with oregano, and that's the aroma that this gives. So some medicine and some flavors, and then this Hortonova netting is installed again, so we can do some slicing cucumbers that'll climb up through there. They've been soaked really, really thoroughly. They haven't germinated yet, so hopefully the seed's still good. But that's what's happening in this high tunnel right now. We'll take a quick break from the wander for George's sake and for a little stick action. This is my day, all day, every day. This dude never wants to stop. Good boy. Can you sit? Good boy. Can you sit? Sit. Take a wander into the main garden now. We put up some fencing around here mainly because our other dog Lenny, our sweet, sweet little man Lenny, liked to try to jump through. And so I ended up putting up 4-foot tall 2x4 welded wire fencing around this in order to deflect him, and that became a really nice trellis for peas. We've been eating off of these all spring. They're starting to get a little bit haggard with the heat of the summer, but they're still putting off peas. They've made it into our salads almost every day. It's the beauty of if you are going to install fencing around an area, it becomes a trellis. Could there be cucumbers? Could there be peas and beans? Can there be tomatoes woven through all that? Even Hibblitzia is doing really nicely on the edge here. But let's go into the main garden. We're about a week out from peak milkweed season. It was incredibly aromatic in here not too long ago, about a week ago. This is a plant that we had nothing to do with planting. We just work around for the most part. Kind of come up with a policy that as long as the milkweed is relatively close to the fence line in here, we absolutely leave them, because we can always throw a rope around them to help keep them up. And then where they flop over into our crops and the things we're trying to grow, we pull them and we lay them into the pathway. I'll make a separate video about this soon enough, but we just received a 37 cubic yard load of sawdust a few weeks ago, and that renovated the pathways immensely. We just chop and dropped a bunch of branches, did some weeding through it all in the walkways, poured the sawdust on top, and it really helps the gardens pop. That's a really nice feature about mulching deeply in your walkways. You can use a pretty wide range of material that's not necessarily ideal for growing plants. This sawdust is actually kind of tannic. It has red oak in it and tons of carbon, so it actually suppresses the weeds from growing, but in a natural way. I almost missed a really sweet combo that's happening in here. There's a sweet cherry that a blue jay must have pooped out. I remember blue jays sitting over here eating cherries a bunch of years ago. They sat on the metal fence, and that's about the distance of a blue jay's butt from the fence is where the cherry landed. That started growing beautifully, and then we had a Niagara grape that I was training onto the fence, and it found the cherry recently, and now the cherry has become a grape tree, and we've got all of these just gorgeous clumps of grapes, and cherry feels relatively strong. So long as I go through and cut some of these excessive vines off, it feels like the cherry is going to be able to hold the grape crop for this year. The birds seem to enjoy the cherries pretty immensely, and that's fine so long as we can get grapes from a cherry tree. Into the garden proper, this is where it gets wild. If it wasn't wild enough, it is extra wild in here. This first bed has so much happening. There's flowers on the edges. The amaranth are all volunteers, but we selectively non-weed amaranth where they show up in spots that feel really nice. The rest we can pull and give to the chickens. Same thing with borage. Whenever it shows back up in the garden, we let it be, and then we chop and drop and feed to the chickens where they start to flop and get in the way. It's actually a hybrid bed I've talked about before. The idea of nursery and then our crops on the boundary. In this case, we have the interior set to Siberian peach. These are already 3 feet tall, and we are in the beginning of July. They're flanked in bronze fennel and dill, which we'll harvest and eat. Probably need to start harvesting these plants a little bit more assertively to promote the peach. But there's whole veins in the center of this bed, the center of the next bed over. There's poppy, there's good King Henry, there's Siberian peach, and some kale, just the kales being the actual normal thing in the mix. Put in some effort to really immensely increase the numbers of sorrel in the garden. Sasha loves cooking with this. We really enjoy eating these greens. They're reliable, they're disease resistant, pest resistant. We've offered these on the website for a number of years. It's a particular variety that does not bolt, and we were digging pretty deep into some of the beds that she harvested from in order to satisfy shipping needs. And so this spring we doubled down and put in a bed like this, another bed or two like this in some other areas, and this way she can harvest immense bowlfuls of amazing greens. If you haven't cooked with sorrel, it's somewhere between lemon and spinach, and this is a variety that never bolts. It just looks like this all season, so periodically we can freshen them up by cutting them really hard and sending those greens to the chickens, and then it regrows beautiful fresh greens, or it just sits still and we harvest as we want. Sasha and Zelda are coming out for our evening salad harvest. We've had so much lettuce this year and it's been fantastic. Let's see what they're up to. Hi! She's not so sure.
No.
No, she is.
She's hungry too.
We want salad, she wants milk. Got some pretty complex layouts to our pathways. Lots of little forks in the roads, little labyrinth stuff. This season we made a little cut through here and then another, it's like a zigzag walkway. It's kind of a dead end here, turns and goes this way, and breaking up the beds in this way feels really fun and pretty enjoyable. It really works well as well. Here we've got some complexity again, who'd have figured, some borage that will need to be cut at some point soon. We had an abundance of Nanking cherry seed from last season. I think we're going to be able to really offer Nanking cherry again in earnest. And this is the center of the bed doing the nursery work. And then we have celery, a purple celery variety we save seed from on the edges. Now we grew some cultivar persimmons in this bed last year. It's important to kind of remember what's happening in these beds year by year, because these are all root fragments of these persimmons. So when we dig the Nanking cherry in the fall, we can harvest some extra bonus persimmons as well. Same thing with the thornless blackberry. We had them in here once upon a time. I kind of don't really want them in here anymore. They're too big too fast, but that's where we'll get our nursery stock for shipping from these quote-unquote weeds that we just are thrilled to bits are here. We'll just manage them as we can. Some beds doing things that are a little bit normal looking somewhat. There's carrots, there's beets, there's carrots, there's beets. Hey, that's kind of straightforward and annual-ish. But then there's also Malokia, which is a favorite green of Sasha, or Jew's mallow. It's like a stinging nettle flavored super nutrient green from Egypt, I believe. That's in there growing and doing its thing. And then the usual again, some kale. So it's pleasurable to have such wild mixes of things. Like here's Korean celery, beautiful perennial, early rich spring vegetable with honeyberry, and then kind of normal kale. And why not? Let's just mix all of these beautiful characters together. They really do get along. Got a little bit more physical complexity set up this year to help do a little bit more work with trellising and support of plants. Kind of straightforward. Some metal T-posts, every, one at the end and one in the middle of the bed, and then some wooden bits with 17 gauge wire flipped back and forth. And this just lets us, for example, here are bush beans, but with them leaning on the wire, they can grow really nicely, put on a heavy crop without having any problems. And then we can also trellis. Pretty straightforward idea. Our tomatoes can be woven through there. We can twist tie or make little cotton string knots on them and then train them up this whole thing. We had an intense windstorm not too long ago, and this corn was growing so beautifully in such rich, loose soil that it blew over. So we straightened them back up, we hilled them to help give them support, and then with these posts and the wire, it makes a backstop so that if the winds pick up again, we can either put a loop around them or just let them grow. They seem to be good now. They're on their own, growing really nicely. These are an open pollinated sweet corn that we can enjoy. And then there's some climbing beans, some pole beans that actually make both a green bean that's quite nice as well as a dried bean, and that can climb up through this lattice work. We'll add a little bit of string to make it easier for them. And in this whole area, it's a really successful, successful, I'm not quite sure the way to say it. This spring, this was entirely weeds, and the way we converted it into this very productive garden bed with hot peppers and different waves of lettuces. There's green beans, there's sunflower, there's celery, there's more hot peppers, there's cucumbers, there's the corn. All of this was from clearing out all of the bedding from the chicken coop and dumping it right on top of the weeds, really thick, soaking that down with rainwater, and then making these dumped piles, basically like wheelbarrow load piles of compost from the chicken yard, and then pushing seed directly in the form of the bush beans, which now have closed canopy really nicely and just keep gushing beautiful sweet beans. There's Provider, bush bean, and Gold Rush in there. We transplanted in the hot peppers, we transplanted in celery, which is now filling out, and likewise with the corn. And what a neat, successful, simple thing. Suppress the weeds, not by tilling or spraying, but just dump a ton of organic matter on top of them early in the season. Veins, concentrated veins of compost, and then really thick sowing of cover crop, which happens to actually be food we would want. The amaranth volunteered, the sunflower volunteered, and again, we'll just leave them unless they prove that they're in the way. But right now, they're just beautiful and nice, so they are welcome to stay. Been really enjoying in the later day and the early morning. On the hottest days, you get really nice dappled shade from the overstory that's starting to form in here. In the morning, it's conferred to us by this hawthorn, which was in the landscape when we started gardening here. I kept going back and forth on cutting it because it had some disease issues, but it seems to have grown through the disease issues because of all the compost deposited around it. And on the hottest days, 8, 9 in the morning, it's still shaded enough in here to be comfortable. So thanks, hawthorn. And late day, we're finding our neighbor's trees way off in the distance provide some shade, and the willows are starting to thicken up enough that we can find some shady nooks to work if we want to. It's nice to create microclimates and protection and resilience in the form of saying yes to lots and lots of trees, even in an annual garden context. Speaking of, we've got some volunteers here in the form of tulip poplar. Now these are trees that become absolutely giant giant trees. And what I've been doing is pollarding them. So here's one. Both of these showed up on their own, just kind of in a wild way, and they were allowed to grow for a while. And what I've been learning is if you do a nice pollarding cut, a good heading cut when they're dormant, 5-6 feet or so off the ground, the regrowth is often really useful for robins and other birds to make their nests. They didn't do it in these two exactly, but a lot of the times when I pollard these trees at this height, the regrowth happens and then there'll just be birds' nests on top of those. So it's a really nice bonus, and then it gives the option of all this mulch in the fall that can drop and a trellis for us to grow some crops up. So I haven't made the time, but just recently I dumped hay on the weeds that were around this tulip poplar, dumped a windrow of compost. We'll sow that out to, I don't know, maybe some okra and some more beans, some nice warm weather crops. And then on the south side, put some cucumbers and train them with string up into the tulip poplar and let them not compete or fight, but let the cucumber use the body of the tulip poplar to grow. And then in the fall, all these leaves will drop down and feed the soil. And then we can cut as we need as a chop and drop mulch. And that works pretty nicely. The eastern side of the garden moves a bit more towards the perennial picture. There's some American persimmons. This was a nursery bed that was in here a bunch of years ago. There's about 5 or 6 trees. We'll thin them down to, you know, 1 male and a few females when they are of age to show what's going on there. And they're growing in and through this gumi, which we've just started to finalize the harvest. There's a bit left in here. There are hundreds and hundreds of fruits on just this one plant. Talked about this plant a little ways back. A really phenomenal nitrogen fixer. We'll have to make some decisions about how it's interacting with the persimmon. Persimmon's a pretty broad and shade offering plant, and the gumi would like a little bit of light. So what I've been doing is, as time allows, I come through and just look on the persimmon for branches that have absolutely no flowers or fruit. So I think that they're males. I'm not 100% sure, but I think they are. It's like on this side, I chopped back some of the branches to lay in the walkway. So it's weed suppression and soil building in the walkway and a little bit of a light release to the gumi. I definitely am not going to get rid of the persimmons to promote the gumi. I think they can get along together, but you can see they are pretty intimately connected, gumi and persimmon, persimmon and persimmon and persimmon. So there's 5 persimmon in there. We'll thin them down to 1 or 2 females and probably 1 male, or no males if that's needed. We've got this obscene amount of growth. This is all brand new growth this season from our friend Scotia. Amazing, amazing productive elderberry. If I can find the video, I'll link to it here, where I talked about different strategies of cutting elder. I thought I was going to make the time to actually cut this flush to ground. I didn't, but there's just an immense amount of green growth in there. But luckily it was enough of a reduction. Believe it or not, this is a reduction in biomass of this elder, enough to allow some light. You can see this poor apple just was not up for the competition, but now there's a little bit more. There's a couple of apples, they're forming, and so I just periodically keep coming through with pruners and snip the elder that's encroaching on the apple and feed it to the apple. And I've been doing the same thing. There was an alder that showed up on the edge of this little pond. This is a sweet little calamus and arrowroot pond that we have here. This is not cattails, it's entirely calamus. It took a lot of cultivation to get there, but this lovely, lovely medicine pond. And the alder was growing quite a bit through here, and over the last few days I came through after rains, cut the green canopy and fed it to the root zone of the apple, fed it to the root of that grape over there, of some apricots and some peaches. It looks like a sloppy mess in some ways, and that's fine if that's the aesthetic or if that's the concern that folks have. I could understand that, but it's really functional. So all those branches and coarse material, all that green manure, will protect the soil from the absolute most wild rains, but also if we have prolonged drought, there's an immense amount of water that's stored in there now, and that suppressed some of the goldenrod and grasses that were in here, the weeds, and really is promoting the apricot, the English walnuts. So these were old nursery beds that I'm just going to leave these plants to continue to grow, and we'll thin them out later as chop and drop mulch is needed. A peach grown from seed with a really nice crop on it. I believe this is Siberian peach, and there's stinging nettles all throughout underneath, which I did not explicitly plant, but we allowed to be here for a while. And I think we're going to keep going with grass clippings and hay and alder branches and chop and drop, keep pinning the nettles down and see if we can't reduce them a little, because as I'm recording this shot, my ankle is fired up from just bumping into a little bit of it. We love that plant, they're phenomenal, and maybe they're not the best in this particular context. We're going to think about dinner here pretty soon, so I'm going to wrap this video up. Boy, I just really bopped around random highlights throughout this garden. Are there aspects to this garden you'd want to see more details on? Are there things about it that make no sense to you, or you'd like more clarification? Feel free to ask questions in the comments. And yeah, are there aspects that people would like a deeper dive on? I think there's a lot happening in this space. It has evolved into what feels like a pretty functional and productive space. We really enjoy being in this garden. It's incredibly low cost, or next to no cost, to maintain, and generates both nursery stock for our financial needs as well as food and medicine. And there are so many birds that come in here and hang out in the elderberry or come pick gummies. Everybody and their uncle, all the different creatures are in here harvesting as well, and it seems to work. It feels like the ideas of permaculture, which are exemplified, I think, or alive in this garden, really do confer the greatest good for the greatest being. So there's a lot less stress in here. There's a lot of shared harvest because there's just so much overabundance in this space. And that's it for now. That's our pretty small little wonderful backyard garden in mid-swing, looking at probably just about 10 or 15% of what's happening in here. And let me know what you'd like to see more of. We're going to try to do some more update videos around how the sawdust went down, what that whole project looked like, as well as some other things here or there. I look forward to sharing more with folks as time allows. Hope everyone is having a lovely midsummer.